I think having people around who are at truly the top of their game has really helped me conquer that fear of, okay, I'm going to take this really big swing and it's very possible that I fail in a really public way. And I think that the more you do that, and when you do fail, because, when you take big swings, you fail, that's what happens. And sometimes you hit it and sometimes you don't. I think you learn to deal with that ego blow.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Freedom Solar Power. When I first started looking into solar, I thought it would be a clunky and expensive process. I've learned it isn't nearly as hard as you think. Freedom Solar Power makes it simple. They provide a turnkey solution that is focused on educating their customers on the experience from installation to everyday use and savings. They ensure you have all the information needed to make sure going solar is right for you. From firsthand experience, it makes sense both financially and for the environment. With no down payment required, solar not only adds immediate value to your home, but it's also great for the environment and might even provide immediate savings, not to mention the year-end tax benefits, a credit of 26% this year. Freedom Solar operates in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, and Florida, and there are plenty of other great options nationwide. Thank you to Tracksmith for sponsoring this episode. Tracksmith just released their spring collection, and as a season shift yet again, I'm proud to continue this partnership with them. Tracksmith is a brand for committed runners like you and me, people who know that the best part of a busy day is squeezing in a workout. They offer products for training, racing, and rest days, which you know I'm a fan of, and create experiences that make running more rewarding, more connected, and more meaningful. Visit tracksmith.com/forthelongrun to see some of my favorite pieces, and all orders with the code FORTHELONGRUN, all one word, will receive free shipping, and 5% of your purchase amount will be donated to the Michael J. Fox Foundation to help find a cure and support those living with Parkinson's. Welcome back. I have Tyler Andrews joining me from very far away and very high up, which we'll get into. This is Tyler's second round on the podcast. His first episode was episode 14, which was about 200 episodes ago. So Tyler, welcome back to the podcast, and excited to dive in here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it was 200 podcast episodes ago and maybe 3,000 miles closer to each other.
So first question, for those who don't know, who is Tyler?
Who am I? Who's Tyler? So I am an endurance athlete. I'm a runner. I'm a mountain climber. Recently, I've kind of been bridging those two more together, but I've been kind of pushing my own limits in the endurance sports space, starting as a runner and now moving more into the mountain ultra trail world for the last, 15, 16 years now, since I was a teenager. And I'm here in Quito, Ecuador.
Very cool. And so you're living at 9,000 feet. You're doing your thing. You had a focus when we last spoke. Your focus at the time was on the roads. You had just raced in Project Carbon X, seeking 100K world record, and you were talking about the long road racing. Yeah. So talk to me about the. For those who want to hear about your intro into running or into longer distance, pop back to episode 14. But today we're going to chat about more of the transition and where your mindset is at now and what you learned in the last couple of years. So curious about the desire to move from long road stuff to long mountain stuff.
Yeah, I think desire is really the right word there. And I think it pairs with motivation for me. I am someone who has always been motivated by finding things that challenge me and sometimes scare me a little bit. And whether that's, going up against Jim Walmsley on the roads in the 100K or, trying to run up a 20,000 plus foot mountain, I think it's that same spark that I get inside that kind of is like, oh, that's exciting. That's something that I kind of daydream about and think about and freaks me out a little bit in a good way. And I think those are the kind of things I look for. So yeah, when we were talking last, it's interesting. Like it actually wasn't that long ago, but a lot has changed for me in terms of what I'm pursuing in my career. I think I still thought of myself as a road guy and even a marathoner. Like I was still prepping for the 2020 marathon trials, Olympic marathon trials, and I did run those. But I think that was really kind of a catalyst race for me in that, obviously the global pandemic, COVID started right after that, and that kind of first, I would say 6 to 12 months of the pandemic was really me just trying to figure out what motivated me with not a lot of real race options at that point. I didn't have the marathon anymore. I didn't have like that I've been planning to run Comrades, which is a long road ultra that year. And that obviously got canceled, and like US 100K champs got canceled. So it was like all these road ultras that I was kind of interested in got canceled. And I suddenly just kind of like stumbled into the FKT world. Mostly because I'd always been interested in hiking and climbing and mountaineering, and I had kind of been doing that in my off season. And so it was really right after the Olympic trials in 2020, I went over to Nepal on vacation. Like I just planned to do a hiking trip over there. I'd always wanted to go to the Himalaya and had this time. And that was like right before COVID kind of blew up. And I went there, and it essentially everything in the United States started shutting down while I was there on this hiking trip in the middle of Nepal. And I realized very quickly, talking to my agent and my coaches and people at Hoka, that all these spring races that I wanted to do were going to get canceled. And long story short, I decided to go after this FKT on the Everest Base Camp Trail, which that was kind of my first really long trail run. And it was just like, it was such an amazing adventure. I had so much fun, and like it was so hard in like really interesting ways to me that I found fascinating. And that was the beginning of this focus of like, okay, maybe I can kind of combine this love for, being outdoors in the mountains at really high altitude with the long distance running stuff that I've been doing for the last 10 years. And is there a way that those overlap? And so I think these last few years have really been basically just figuring out how to combine those two things. And it's been a lot of experimentation. It's been a lot of trial and error. There's been a lot of failure in there, but it's been an amazing process to just discover this kind of new joy in the sport, where I kind of felt like I was plateauing in the marathon. And that's why I moved to the longer road stuff, because I felt like I still had room to improve there. And then once I moved to the mountain and trail stuff, it just felt like a whole new world of opportunity to learn and grow and get better. And so that's kind of where I am now. Is I feel like I've just spent the last few years really getting my feet under me in this world and tackling some really cool projects and getting able to like rub elbows with some like really amazing athletes in the ultra trail world and kind of learning from them. And now I think that's kind of been my focus for the last couple of years. And it's funny because now we're talking and I'm actually in a marathon block. Like I'm kind of going back to my roots, and like I'm going to try and get my third Olympic trials qualifier for 2024. So I'm actually like completely ignoring everything I just said and like going way back to that. But that's still, I think, my longer term focus. This I see as more of like a stepping stone to other things. But now I definitely see myself as more of a mountain trail athlete going forward.
Are you marathon training at 9,000 feet?
Yeah, we are. And it's been really interesting because I've done I've spent a lot of time in Quito. Quito is a place that I've been coming to since 2008. And it's kind of become my de facto winter training block or winter altitude training camp for the last 4 or 5 years. And there have been some times where I've done really good like marathon and 50K, like road 50K, fast 50K blocks here that have gone really well. So I think I am like really lucky in that I like learned about altitude in the Andes, where I just think in the US there's a very different attitude about like what is high and like where you can train at. And here it's like, I train with runners here who are really, really good. Like we have some Kenyan guys in our group. We have some Olympic caliber Ecuadorian and Venezuelan guys in our group. And like, to them, it's like nothing to train at 9,000 feet. That's what they do. That's where they live. But if you tell an American that you're going to go train in Breckenridge for a marathon and like do fast long runs and stuff, they're like, you're out of your mind. That's crazy. So I think like it's a little bit of that, just like setting your expectations differently here. I kind of always just had that of like, oh yeah, it's just, this is where I come for altitude. It's normal. And like my body reacts really well. I know it's not for everyone, but for me, I think I can get in the work I need here at 9,000 feet. And we can actually even go down to like 7,000 feet or 4,000 or 5,000 feet if we really want to get a lot more oxygen and get the legs moving a little bit. But anyways, yeah. So I am doing a marathon block now, but it's been, for me, it's very much a stepping stone to staying in touch with that speed for other trail races in the future.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's like fascinating to hear you talk about it in that way. As we talked about, I spent 2 months at 9,600 feet, and like I didn't have a good long run for 2 months. And like it was the last week that I was there, and I ran 15 miles, and I was like, whoa, this is great. But you get stupid fit. But
Yeah.
then it gives you the context of like, now I'm in Boulder, and like 5,000 feet doesn't
Yeah, it
seem
feels easy.
all that high. Yeah. I don't want to talk too much about altitude. I just find it fascinating.
Hmm.
I want to get back to something you mentioned. You mentioned you've failed a lot and learned from it. You've taken some like spectacularly large swings over the years, and I really respect that. And you've just been like, fuck it, I'm doing it full send.
Yep.
Here are my goals. I want to set world records. I want to, run up Everest, like crazy shit like that
Hmm.
like most people might set one of those goals as like a lifetime challenge. Talk to me about like shooting your shot, and like where does this like gusto come from?
Where does it come from? I have to give a lot of credit to the people around me. I think like I've been very lucky, like I mentioned before, that I've just been surrounded by literally some of the best people in the sport. Like I was living with Jim Walmsley in Flagstaff and his partner here in Ecuador. I trained with Carl Egloff, who's probably a less well-known name to the runners out there, but is the best speed climber in the world. Got the records on Denali and Kilimanjaro, and he's going for Everest. So like I think I've been so lucky to be surrounded by such really talented people, that, it's literally like it's breakfast conversation at Jim's house to be talking about winning UTMB. So it's like, it normalizes those things a little bit where it seems from the outside like, oh, wow. Yeah. When you look at it on paper, like these are really crazy things that like not many people are thinking about or capable of doing. But when you surround yourself with the right people who are performing, at this truly exceptional level, I think you allow yourself to think, okay, yeah, like Jim can do that. Why can't I? Or Carl can do that. Why can't I? And that's been really positive for me in terms of helping me set goals. I think having people around who are at truly the top of their game has really helped me conquer that fear of, okay, I'm going to take this really big swing, and it's very possible that I fail in a really public way. And I think that the more you do that, and like, when you do fail, because, when you take big swings, you fail, like that's what happens. And sometimes you hit it and sometimes you don't. I think you learn to deal with that ego blow. Like, sure, it still hurts your ego, and it's like hurts your confidence when those things don't go well. But I think one of the things I've learned over the last, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years, especially in my professional career, has been how to look at those events, whether they go well or poorly, and take something positive from it. Okay, like, you mentioned Project Carbon X was around the last time we talked. Like, I ran 2 of those projects and dropped out in both of them. Like in both times I was going for the world record. In both times I realistically thought I have a shot at the 100K world record. And both times I didn't even make it to like 40 miles. It's like not even that close. And I took a ton away from that. Like at the time, those were super disappointing results. I was really bummed about them. I was really stoked that Jim did so well. But at the same time, I was like, yeah, I was super disappointed. Like it sucks. Like the few days after that, it's like you're just like kicking your own ass about it a little bit. But at the same time, I think as I've gotten older and a little bit more mature, you can look at those and transition more quickly from like, wow, I suck and I should just quit running, to, okay, like that was a big goal. I went for it. Here's some things that I probably screwed up both on race day and in training. And those are going to make me stronger next time. And then I'm going to find the next thing that motivates me. And again, like we even the very first question, I think that the big thing for me is motivation, is like, what is the thing that motivates me? And I think for me, that's always been like figuring out where can I compete at the highest level? Like that is the thing that excites me the most. I love competing against myself and seeing that self-improvement. Like that's what's been motivating me since I was a teenager. But at the same time, I want to compete with others at the absolute highest level that I can. And I think that's part of what pushed me from, the road marathon scene to like the road 50K scene into like the ultra trail world, is just like, okay, I'm finding my niche. It's like, where can I be the most competitive? I could focus on the marathon for the rest of my career. And maybe with super shoes and everything, I'm going to take a couple more minutes off my PR, but I'm never going to run 201, 202, even 208, and be competitive on the world stage. I know that just from my physiology. So it just didn't feel that exciting to me anymore. The motivation was not there. It was like, okay, I kind of figured out where my limits are with this one. And I'm going to go do something else now because like, it's just not that exciting to me. It didn't motivate me to go out and train my butt off just to like, take a minute or two off my PR. It didn't seem that cool. It felt a lot more exciting to be like, okay, I can go to a really big trail race and be competitive with the lead pack, or I can go set a record on one of the 7 summits. Like those are things that are really, to me, like the pinnacle of those sports. And like, yeah, obviously they're more niche sports, but I think that they also are more catered to my specific skill set that I both have innately and the skill set that I've developed over the years. So in terms of big goals, kind of getting back to your question, I've rambled off a little bit, but I think I'm at the point in my career where if I don't have a really big goal, I don't really have the motivation anymore. Like I think I've been doing this for long enough that I need something that's really big of both an internal and external goal. So it's like, it's really hard for me personally. And then it's also really competitive, like on the world stage. Like that's how I get motivated. And yeah, like I said before, it kind of scares me sometimes. Like literally, I get like goosebumps. But I think that's the sensation that I look for when I'm thinking about what to pursue in the long term.
That makes sense. I totally get the what you were saying about like where does the motivation come from? If it's not equal parts like excitement, possibility, and fear, then what's the point? I want to go back to something you said at the beginning of your answer to this question. You had said your ability to set these goals and take these big swings comes from the people you're able to rub elbows with or break bread with or whatever. Like you and I share that in that, like, I feel incredibly lucky and it's a luxury that like I get to do that as well. Some of it through this podcast and some of it through like the people that I know in the community, but and it's incredibly valuable to just see excellence and observe excellence and see it in practice when somebody is not exposing it or like they're not on, right? Like if you're having a conversation with a friend, they're not recording a podcast or they're not, a part of a panel. And so to just see like day in and day out of somebody who is able to be excellent is invaluable. So my question is, for those who don't have that luxury and who aren't, eating breakfast with Jim Walmsley or, recording 200 podcast episodes with people like yourself, what's the takeaway? How do you emulate what these people are doing without, being in their living room?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm not sure I have a great answer. I think that almost all of us know people who are exceptional at something. I don't think it has to be the thing that you are pursuing. So like I got really lucky because I became friends with these people who are exceptional at the things that I want to actually do. I think that, you could find, the professor at your university or your friend who's an exceptional violinist or something, like there are people who are exceptional at something everywhere around us. And you see tons of overlap in the personality traits, the way that these people live their lives, whether they're pursuing music or business or running. A lot of the same kinds of motivation and drive and passion and even just like little things like the way that they structure their days and the way that they focus and the way that they talk, that I see parallels all the time between whether it's, other high level athletes that I know, or again, even just like business people or musicians or artists. I see the same kind of traits. So I would say just try and find those people who are really passionate and exceptional in their field, whatever that is, and then look for that overlap. It doesn't have to be in sport. It doesn't have to be in exactly, like road ultras, if that's your niche. Like you can get inspiration from Usain Bolt. If you're an ultra runner, maybe he's a bad example, but there are lots of other athletes that we can look to for, I look to guys like, like Alex Honnold. I think is a really inspiring athlete with what he's doing and the way he's pushing the sport and the way he's pushes himself and manages fear and things like that. So I think there's all kinds of ways that we can look to people, whether they're literally the people in our house or in our friend circle, or they're people who are just out in the wider world that we can maybe not get to know personally, but go listen to podcasts about other people, whether it's Jim or Killian or people in other sides of the sports, or read their memoir or something like that. I actually read a lot of memoir, whether it's athletes or like movie stars. I find them really fascinating.
What are the commonalities that you're seeing in the memoirs?
The commonalities are that most people who we think of as extremely successful were really unsuccessful for a long time before they were successful. Like the expression 10 years to an overnight sensation, I think applies to almost everyone, whether you're, a movie star or an athlete. It's like you spend so much time just being given all this horrible feedback and doing poorly. Like the people who are truly exceptional from like day one, like Usain Bolt probably is an example of that. He's a genetic freak of nature. He's the best we've ever seen. Eliud Kipchoge might be another example in the running world. But most of these people, like go read about Jim's story. Jim struggled a lot, and I think that is the thing that a lot of us miss when we look at someone doing something exceptional. Is we see, obviously, you see the exceptional thing, you see that publicized, but what you don't see, unless you go, read the book or watch the documentary or listen to the whole story on the podcast or whatever, is the 10 years of, having a little success and then a lot of failure and then a little more success and then a lot more failure and then a little more success. And like, even in that super exceptional thing, or even afterwards, when they're already really famous, like you still don't see all those times that person is failing, like, because there's no story about that. Like that doesn't make it into the YouTube documentary or into the New York Times. It's like, if Alex Honnold like goes halfway up Half Dome and then comes back down because he gets freaked out, like, or El Cap, like that happens in Free Solo in the movie when he's talking about it, or like the first time he goes up, he makes it like a third of the way and then just like bails because he's like, I just wasn't feeling it. And like that we know about because it's part of the story and it's part of a film. But normally, like we have tons of things like that, and all the mountain stuff that I was just doing in the last few months, I was probably batting like 300 for like things that I actually like wanted to accomplish and then did. And there were like 2 out of 3 times where I would like go try and do something and then either I would fail or I would get freaked out and turn around or whatever. But for whatever reason, it didn't happen. And most of the time you don't hear about those things. You only hear about, oh, here's the one really successful thing that they did. And so you kind of assume that like all these high level athletes are just bouncing from like great success to great success to great success, and you don't see like this silent graveyard of like all this other stuff. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I can't even remember what the question was. Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, that answered the question. Yeah. So the concept of the consistency, right, is fascinating to me. My dad made a comment recently, and he's probably listening to this. Hello, Dad. He made a comment. He's like, it surprises me the level of access you have to these incredible people. And I'm like, yes, they're incredible people, but they're just exceptional at being consistent, right? Sure, there's some genetics at play, but you can't have good genetics and not be consistent and be good for a long period of time. You have to do the work. And I forget who I was talking with about this, but it was Peter Bromka, actually. At the Endeavor Run. Yes, go Jumbos. So he was talking about how he finds that people who are chasing a goal, who don't hit it at first and continue to push on, they're the most interesting people. It doesn't matter if that goal is breaking 2 hours in the marathon, breaking 3 hours in the marathon, breaking 5 hours in the marathon. The number really doesn't matter. It's the approach of a goal where you're not doing it for a while. Yeah. And you can't follow a journey, or you can't chase a goal like that and struggle, succeed, and not have interesting takeaway. Like that, that process inherently is interesting because of the variability of success and failure. And then, another friend of his and ours, Jake Tuber, talks about the like corkscrew principle of like life is like this spiral that sometimes you're going up and sometimes you're going down and sometimes you're going up. But the goal is for the start point and the end point to be on a different plane, right? You start here and your corkscrew is corkscrewing its way up. And you can fail, you can succeed, but the And the delta might stay the same of like, wow, that was really awesome. And wow, that was really terrible. But it just inches up and up and up. And your ability to attain excellence improves, and your ability to do things that, 3 years ago might have seemed totally unattainable and totally unreasonable becomes that big, scary goal that you can chase. Like 5 years ago, what you're doing today, would you have thought you'd be doing it?
No, definitely not. No.
So what's that like to look back on that and be like, damn, Tyler of 2000 and whatever, he would be shocked with what Tyler of today is doing.
Yeah. I mean, I look all the way back to like high school for me, and I think that's one of the fascinating things about running. And I think it's one of the things that attracted me to the sport and attracts a lot of people to sport is that you do have that level of comparison. So you can see that corkscrew, I think of it like a sawtooth sometimes, like going up. There are lots of things where you can't objectively say in the same way, I am X amount better than I was 5 years ago, right? Like if you're a basketball player, you can say, hey, I could have kicked my ass 5 years ago, or I can kick my 5 years ago times ass on the basketball court, but you don't have the same metrics where you can literally just look at your training log and say, okay, yeah, I'm way faster. I couldn't have done that 5 years ago. That would have been completely unthinkable. And I think it was one of the things that initially got me hooked in running, because like when you're getting started, usually that improvement happens very quickly. And I think that was super exciting to me to see that, even like literally week to week when I was, 16 years old. And now I think it's looking at things like, yeah, I'm taking on things that I couldn't do before. And maybe like, again, I've reached that plateau level in the marathon or even in, like the 5K and 10K. I think I could still improve a tiny bit in those events if I really focused on them. But it's like, okay, where is that delta going to be the biggest that you're talking about, right? Like, where can I see the biggest improvement? And, I think it's really interesting to see how interrelated all those things are for me. Like, I think I've gotten so much better at running on trails and running on mountains, even in the last 2 years. It's just such a unique skill that I didn't have significantly from the first like 10 or 12 years of my running career, and then just focusing on it for a little bit. It's like you're a beginner again all of a sudden, and you see those tremendous gains really quickly. But now it's really interesting to see, okay, actually like some of that just getting stronger, I think, running more vert, running more at altitude, going to really high altitude the last few months. Now I'm seeing this transition back into like the marathon stuff where suddenly I'm like, oh, wow, I'm like having the best marathon phase I've had in a couple of years all of a sudden, which is really cool. Because now it's like I'm doing workouts that at 9,000 feet that I would have like been pretty pleased with at sea level a couple of years ago. So it's like, that's really exciting to me to be able to see things like that where it's, you see the improvement. And it's one thing to measure it like event to event, but it's another thing to see like how those kind of carry over. And it's almost like a cumulative effect where like it's greater than the sum of its parts. You know what I mean? Where like if you improve like across various disciplines, it's like, oh, like you're getting stronger. Your mechanical efficiency is improving, and that's going to affect everything. So it's going to affect your higher end speed. It's going to affect your mountain climbing. It's going to affect your mountain descending, all that stuff. So it's been really interesting to see how that happens, comparing myself to that person 5 years ago on the physical side of just like seeing how all those little things have improved. And then how, as an overall athlete now, I feel so much stronger across the board, actually. Like I really expected this block of kind of speed of marathon work to feel really hard and really uncomfortable, and to have that transition be a lot rougher. But really what I'm finding is like, actually, the mechanical stuff came back really quickly of running fast. And I'm so much stronger than I was 4 or 5 years ago, that I'm able to handle way more work at a way higher clip at higher altitude, which like all those things are great. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where everything, like a rising tide lifts all boats, to keep using like tired cliches, like everything, when everything is improving a little bit, you end up sometimes getting this big boost. You know what I mean?
Thanks again to Freedom Solar Power for supporting this episode of the podcast and our environment by providing an easy, green energy source. The buying process was fascinating and eye-opening, and I am excited to pay my learnings forward. If you're curious about going solar in your home, message me on Twitter or Instagram, and I'd be happy to help your journey by providing some great resources. Freedom Solar is a full-service solar company that's been installing solar panels and backup power systems since 2007. They operate in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, and Florida. Not in any of those states? Don't fret, my parents have the same panels from SunPower that were installed by a different company in Massachusetts. SunPower is the best in the business, and that's what Freedom Solar uses. I've enjoyed working with the whole team over at Freedom Solar, and I'm sure you will too. Thanks again to Tracksmith for supporting the podcast. I'm proud to partner with Tracksmith, and they're going to donate 5% of your order value to the Michael J. Fox Foundation for all orders, and you'll also get free shipping. The Michael J. Fox Foundation is dedicated to finding a cure and helping those living with Parkinson's. Both of my grandfathers have or had Parkinson's, and I'm grateful for Tracksmith's support for something so personal. Visit tracksmith.com/forthelongrun to see some of my favorite pieces, and all orders with the code FORTHELONGRUN will contribute towards this donation. I have been loving their Harrier long sleeve and Alston half tights in particular. So for anybody who needs a point of reference, the conventional altitude conversion for 9,000 feet is like more than 30 seconds a mile. So
is it? I actually didn't even know that.
Yeah, it's pretty substantial.
Huh.
It's like, I think it's right around there. I looked it up when I got to Breck last year. So it's so cool that you're able to look back on things that you were doing maybe in Boston and be running those same paces where you are now. And it's the kind of thing that it's like, it's almost unbelievable, right? It's like, look at this growth and look at what happens when you really just, I told my coach the other day, I was like struggling getting out the door for a run. He was like, one foot in front of the other. I believe in you. Like, that's all it takes. And these workouts and the consistency allows you to be that person that, is doing the same paced workout at 9,000 feet that you were doing, 5 years ago, maybe in Boston. The takeaway for those who aren't, going to crazy high elevations is like, look back at some of your first runs. Look at your first 5K time. Look at your first, I had a conversation with Emily Abadi on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she was just like, I couldn't run a half of a mile without stopping. Like, look back on that and then extrapolate or think forward. Like, what will I be looking at in 2 years that will be normal that today seems hard? Like, I find that to be incredibly motivating.
Yeah.
And incredibly, like, having that, not like, it's not an ego, it's not a cockiness. It's like, if you do the work, you will improve. And sometimes we need those reminders and sometimes we don't, but it's really cool to see it in practice and see it like actually coming true.
Yeah. And I would just add, I think so first of all, I think there's always things we can improve. Whether you think you've hit your ceiling or not, there are always things. And it doesn't just mean like, I'm going to run more mileage or I'm going to work out faster. It could be, I'm going to get stronger. I'm going to do more strength training. I'm going to do more vert. I'm going to try and make my long runs longer. Maybe I'm going to try a new race distance. Or it could be like a completely non-physical thing. It could be just like the mental side of sport. Like how strong is your mind? Like, we focus so much on the mileage and splits and all the physical side of training. And that's, I think, one of the big things for me also that I look at when I look at, okay, Tyler in Boston versus Tyler here today in keto, is that I feel so much stronger mentally. I feel like I'm in such a better headspace than I was when I was there. And that, again, it's one of those things that it affects everything across the board, because it means I can train at a higher level. It means I recover better. It means I'm just a general happier person. It means that when I'm racing, I'm stronger and tougher. Like, I think that's a huge part of it too, is finding out where can I improve? Because if you're a beginner, you'll see huge gains with very minimal
anything
complication in your training. Yeah, just run more.
Right.
Just run more consistently. Yeah, it's very simple. Like, running is really simple. Just run more. But then you get to a point, and a lot of people find this like after college, where it's like, I was already running 100 miles a week. What more do you want me to do? Like, and they're like, all right, I guess I'm done. This is it. And I think I was always someone who was like, well, first of all, whatever, I could just keep adding more mileage, and I have run a lot of ridiculous mileage. But like nowadays I think, okay, like what other things can I do? Like, how can I, I've been doing this. I've been like, obsessively trying to perfect my running for the last 15 years. What else is left to do? and I keep finding like these huge treasure troves of things. And I think that for me, the mental training has been like one of those huge things in the last few years. That's really helped me, in addition to just being physically stronger, is just like getting the most out of my body and like being more cooperative with my brain, if that makes sense.
Totally. I want to dive more into that, but the fact checkers have gotten back to me on the altitude conversion. Jack Daniels offers a calculator on how to adjust interval and threshold and tempo runs at different altitudes, and it doesn't go to 9,000 feet. But the 8,000 foot calculation is 20 to 25 seconds a mile. So making sure we're not spreading any misinformation here on this podcast.
Yeah.
So talking about the mental game, I've observed your career, and from the outside, it looks like you've gotten stronger mentally. Not to say you've had, mental weakness in the past.
I totally have. It's fine.
You said that on the last podcast, yes. But it's clear that you're a different athlete than the last time we spoke, and it's like, in the way that we're interacting about what you've done, what you're doing, like you're clearly a different person. How did you do that? Or how are you doing that?
I like the second question because I think of it as very much an active process that you're never really done with, kind of like training the body. How have I done that? Gosh, where do you even begin? I mean, the short answer is just like physically, I think I failed myself a lot mentally. I think that really like right after, like we were talking, that podcast was recorded in May of 2019. And like, that was not me at my best. Like that year and the following year, I had a lot of stuff in my personal life that was just kind of not going well. And also running was not going well. I think that I was, like you said, taking a lot of really big swings and kind of new stuff. And just a lot of them in a row did not go great. I think that fall 2019, I won the 50-mile national championship. And that was like my first good race in like a year, that I'd taken like a bunch of things that had lined up and just all gone poorly for various reasons. And so I think that I was just doing a really bad job at the time of, like I said before, taking the positives from those failures. I was just beating myself up, and I wasn't entirely healthy. I'd had an injury the year before that I was still kind of dealing with. So it was just like a confluence of a bunch of things that had me in a really negative headspace in general, where running felt really stressful. And like every time I was going out, I had to prove something to myself and to other people. And that wasn't good. I think that the Olympic trials and then the beginning of the pandemic really did serve as just a huge catalyst and transition point for me in my life, in terms of, that was the first time that I really seriously thought, like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I just don't know if I'm motivated to do this. And it was one of the lowest points in my life. I'd gone through a really tough breakup with my long-term partner, and that had just like affected me really negatively, and had been dealing with depression before that, and then was dealing with it afterwards. And especially after the trials of having no races on the calendar, and suddenly like just this big kind of hole in my life. It was a really, really dark time. And I think that there wasn't like one kind of like you hit rock bottom moment, but those kind of months were the months where I was like, okay, I need to turn this around somehow. And I need to like basically, if I want to continue pushing my body, I can't do it in the headspace that I'm in. It just like wasn't happening. Like there were days where I just like couldn't get out of bed, let alone get out and like train at a high level. I was like, okay, I just can't. I still feel like I care about running. I feel like I care about pushing myself in this like endurance sport world, but I literally can't do it right now. And it kind of forced the issue of figuring out how do I deal with that? How do I deal with my inner monologue in my brain in a way that is productive and is going to make me happy? And that happiness then leads me into being a better athlete as well. So for me, from an athletic perspective, I think it really started with just getting into a healthier headspace in general, of being a happier person and dealing with my depression. And, that was some therapy. It was a lot of like mindfulness and meditation and stuff like that. And just kind of like learning to live with that. And some of it was just time and letting some things, time heals all wounds. And this is just my like bad cliches podcast, but seriously, I think a lot of it was that, and just learning to I don't even, there's no like simple way to say it other than just like learning to be more, uh,
Resilient.
yeah, resilient is a really good word. Like learning to deal with suffering and failure and pain, whether that's mental and physical. And, I think ultra runners like to pat themselves on the back a little bit about like being so tough. And like, I don't think that ultra runners are any tougher than top level 800-meter runners. I think it's exceptionally hard to train for any really hard endurance race. But I did learn a lot in some of these like really, really long days out there, like specific days that have like that I can look to and be like, oh yeah, that was like a lot of really hard physical and emotional distress that I had to deal with, and that taught me a lot. So I think it was a little bit of a virtuous cycle in terms of I was trying to actively take care of my mind and doing things to do that. And then also, as I did that, I felt more happy and I felt more like I could go out and train. And then that enabled me to take on some of these kind of projects that were bigger and cooler and scarier and exciting. And then I went and did those, and some of them went really well and some of them didn't, but they were all like really interesting learning experiences. And I learned a lot about myself in all of those. And so now when I think about myself and my headspace and where I am, it's like I don't feel like I mastered that. I don't feel like I'm 100%, happy all the time. I don't think anyone is, but I feel like I'm in a situation where my like day-to-day running performance does not determine my happiness, which I think is really important, that I am able to look at that as a part of my life, and I'm able to look at my successes and failures both in a positive light sometimes. And again, it's not to say that I'm not motivated by success. Like I'm a super competitive person and I still beat myself up when I don't achieve something. It's like we were running Ks the other day and it's like on the track and it's like, oh, I hit 301 instead of 3 flat. And I'm like, God damn it. Like, let's go a little quicker on the next one, boys. Like, so it's like that still exists and that still motivates me, but it's not like this, like existential, like need to prove to myself that I am worthwhile. And I think that's the really important distinction that I've made in terms of looking at running and general life happiness as kind of a balance. And so now I feel like the kind of headspace and physical space are pushing each other in a positive direction. Whereas I think a few years ago, they were kind of pushing each other in a negative direction. And I was in a little bit of a downward spiral. I think I have turned that around a little bit. And again, like I still struggle. I still have bad days and bad times and bad workouts and bad races. But I think, like you said, with your corkscrew analogy, that general trend is going up now. And I think that's something that I look at me now as an athlete and as a human being. And I'm like, yeah, that person is in a way better spot than he was even 3 years ago.
It's fascinating. One of the most consistent messages that I've learned or heard on this podcast from high-level athletes or high-level business people or whatever is the disassociation of self-worth and outcomes that you can't control.
Yeah.
Right? You can control certain things and you cannot control, like you can't control how you perform on race day. To a certain extent, you can control doing all of the right things and putting yourself in the best position for race day. You can control all of the, day-to-day things that you do that allow you to be, conventionally successful, et cetera. But if the determinant of success is how you perform against others or against an objective or a arbitrary number, like you can't control who shows up at a race. You can't control that, the top men in the world are running 202, 203, 201, 159. Like those are things that you can't control, but you can control getting the best out of yourself on the day. And I found it to be so fascinating personally. Like my best marathon was on a day where I didn't give a shit about the outcome. And I stood on that start line. I was like, this is a celebration. I'm going to tear it up and see what my body can do on this day. And I PR'd by 20 minutes.
Wow.
And that was no surprise. Like I was, 15 miles into that race and I was like, I'm going to have a good day. Like this is a good day because I came to it from that approach. And then I started asking a question that I'm going to ask you. And then we'll continue from there. But I'm curious, what is your definition of success? And I wish I asked you this in 2019 so that we could
We
splice
compare,
the two
contrast.
answers. Yeah. Because I have a feeling it's very different than what you would have said in 2019.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that, gosh, it's a really good question because like it's so nuanced. Like there's so many levels, right? It's like such a simple question, but it's such a complicated answer, and there's no one little soundbite that I think I could give you that defines it for me. Because to me, I think like success means different things when I think about success for me as an individual versus like how to put this, like, so we talk a lot about internal versus external goals, right? And I think that those are two different things in terms of success. I think there's two different types of success there, and I think they're both important. There's the success that you have, which is like, am I proud of what I've done, right? Like, I think maybe that's your soundbite, is like, success is like, am I proud of what I've done? Like, that's the most fundamental piece of success for me, because if I'm not proud of what I've done and other people care about it, I don't really care about it that much, right? So it's like, that is to me the most crucial piece is, am I proud of it? Does this make me feel fulfilled? Does this make me feel happy, like capital H happy, not just like eating ice cream happy?
With like 5 exclamation points.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is you control that. That's entirely in your control.
I disagree. I don't think it is in my control, because I think that like how the way, I guess like all of the individual steps are kind of in my control, but like how everything lines up on the day, like I'm thinking about like a specific competition or something now. It's like I can be proud of my, maybe you're right. Yeah, I, mean, I don't know. I it's really interesting. I'm like stumbling a lot on my words here. Sorry, listeners.
Maybe where you're going, or I sort of see what you mean. Like you can execute the best to your abilities and still get beat by somebody else that makes it
right, and that can still be disappointing, right? Like I can feel like there can be a level of success where I feel proud of an effort I put in, even if I have a terrible race. Like, so my race at Leadville 100 last year is a good example of that. Like I went in talking all this big braggadocio about how I'm going to win the race in my first 100 miler and blah, blah. And like I shit the bed and had a really bad time, but I finished the race and I was really proud of that. Like that was an extremely challenging physical and mental thing to do. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, was to finish that race and just not drop out. It was so hard. And so I was very proud of that. Am I proud of the way that I handled that race? No, not really. So like, I don't consider it successful in some sense, but I do consider it successful. That's like a weird one, right? Like, I think it can go kind of both ways, where it's like, you can have something where like it's successful on one level and it's not another. I don't know. Maybe we're like tearing this apart too much.
Well, it's like fulfilling and right. You still want more.
Right. And I think that your definition with talking about things you can control versus the things you can't is a really interesting way to look at it, because again, that's an example of like, I think there were things in my control that I did poorly. Overall, it's tricky because like I don't consider that race successful, but I am proud of it. So maybe now I'm like violating my own definition. I don't know. Like I'm getting too far into the semantics here, but like I think we're like mixing up a little bit like the ideas of like pride and contentment and success, right? Which are like all kind of very closely interrelated, but are not quite the same thing. And I think success is this fuzzy word that we think of as like, okay, success is winning the race, or success is getting a medal. That's what success is for me. But success is also something that we define. And so, yeah, sure. For me, success, sometimes I define it as like, that's my goal, is to win the race or to set the course record or whatever that is. And in retrospect, sometimes we look at, okay, was I successful in the way that I executed my plan? Or if I didn't do that, I can still say I was successful in the way that I dealt with that adversity in that race, even if it was completely my fault, you know? So like, I think there's multiple levels of success there, starting with like the external of just like, okay, this is my public goal, is to, you know, run this time in the marathon or win the race. And then there's, okay, like, did I execute well? And then it's like, okay, if I didn't execute well, did I still deal with it well? I guess that's kind of the way I would look at it, is like those 3 tiers, now that I've like really talked myself into it.
Cool. That makes sense. And definitely like an ongoing thought process for sure. I don't think, I mean, that's the beauty of it, right? We all have our own definitions of what makes us happy. And as long as we know what that is and chase that, like that's substantial. I want to go back to something you said originally. You said at the start of the pandemic, you realized that like you didn't have races and you fell into FKTs and started chasing some FKTs and big adventure projects. And you're not racing as much. Talk to me about being a professional athlete with a focus on these big adventures versus lining up and competing at Leadville or Western States or like these places where you see so many pro trail runners competing.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of two sides of the same coin. I think the pandemic has made things just different in so many ways. And I think now, hopefully, knock on wood, we'll start to see things like a little bit more like pre-2020 for the foreseeable future. Again, I think it goes back to motivation. It's what motivates you and how do you stay motivated when you're training and how do you find goals and objectives that are cool and exciting to you. So for me, sometimes that's racing and sometimes it's going and, an FKT is essentially a virtual race over many years, right? So whether that's the Grand Canyon or it's Everest, these are places where the best athletes have gone and tried themselves on these specific things. You can have an FKT from your house to your mailbox or whatever, and no one really cares about that. But if it's really exciting to you, that's great. It's still motivating to you. I think for me, the FKTs that have kind of like lit a fire inside me have been the ones that are challenging to me, that have other athletes who I really respect who have gone after them and either have those records or have had them in the past or have gone and failed. And they're projects that challenge me specifically with the skill set that I've developed over the years. Like I think of myself as someone who competes really, really well at high altitude relative to other people. And there just aren't that many races at 10,000 plus feet, so part of that is like, okay, I think that I can be one of the best in the world on really, high altitude runnable or even not runnable now, just high altitude mountainous things, whether that's a super long race like a Leadville, which again, at this point, I don't really consider that high, or it's, some of these longer mountain FKTs like Aconcagua, the one I just did, or even something like Everest or Denali someday, like these really big mountains that are a little bit more technical. I think that plays really well to my skill set because I've found that, yeah, I can compete with the guys who are the best in the world on these really, really high mountains. And that's something that I'm actually quite new to in terms of the speed climbing side of things. But it's something that I've found I was really successful at really quickly. The way that I think about it is like a lot of pro runners talk about that moment in their childhood, the like gym class mile, like you've heard the story a billion times where it's like, yeah, I was like not that athletic. And then we all had to run a mile in gym class. And I realized like I was so much faster than everyone. And like, I never had that moment. I was not an athletic kid. Like I was not even like the athletic kid who was good at the gym class mile. I was like still getting like not last, but like I was still like not doing that well in those things. Like I think I had the slowest high school PRs of like anyone at the Olympic trials, probably for the last two Olympic trials. And like these big mountains was kind of my gym class mile. It was like I went out like the first time on Cotopaxi, which is like our big mountain here in Ecuador, without even really training for it, and like tied Carl Egloff's record. And he's the best in the world at this stuff. And I'm like, oh shit, like, okay, so that might be something I'm good at. And that was kind of an eye-opening moment for me of like, oh, this is something that's really cool and exciting to me that is totally different from everything that I've been doing for the last 15 years. And it's funny because I'd always loved mountaineering and I'd loved climbing and hiking, but I always thought of it as like, this is what I do in my off season. Like, this is what I do on vacation because it's really hard to like run 140 miles a week on flat, trails or whatever, training for a marathon or a 50K when you're like off doing these big mountains. Like they're really incompatible. And like, so that's just what I do for fun. It's not actually like something I do competitively. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. I really like that stuff. Why can't I just do that competitively? That sounds awesome. That's like the best of both worlds. It like had literally never occurred to me until like a couple of years ago that like, oh yeah, you could like, there's like races and FKTs and stuff that you can go for. And so part of the reason I've gone the FKT route is just because I think in the niche of like the really high altitude stuff, which is what excites me the most right now and kind of where I've found my my niche in terms of my natural ability, I'd say there just aren't that many races that I think are on really big mountains. I think Leadville, the reason that that's so exciting, and I'm going back this year, is because it mixes up a lot of things that I feel like are in my skill set. It's runnable, it's long, it's it's relatively high, but again, not super high. So I think that makes it really interesting to me. But if there were like a race up Aconcagua, I would totally do it. But there isn't. It's just like people go and do it every few years, and the FKT goes down or it doesn't. And so I think that's a circuitous way to answer that. Is like part of it is just like this is a niche that I've found that I really enjoy competing in and training in, and that I think I can do really well at. But it's just it's like a completely different discipline in that there is no race up Everest, there's no race up Aconcagua, there's no race up Denali. It's that's just like the culture of that side of the sport. Is it is more individual for whatever reason. Like part of that being literally just like logistical. Like you usually can't hold an actual race on these things with a bunch of people at the same time. So yeah, that's the long and short of it. Is like I love competition. I love competing against other people, whether that's head to head, person to person, like in an actual race, or whether it's competing against the ghost of Kilian Jornet or Carl Egloff, from their time a few years ago. So to me, it's still competition. It's still I'm competing against those people, and it's just whether they're literally next to me on the mountain or the trail, or they're in the history books.
Very cool. Well, I will definitely be seeing you at Leadville, so that's exciting.
Awesome.
And
are you running or crewing or pacing?
No, we're there for work.
Gotcha.
So maybe crewing.
Nice.
Yeah, so that should be fun. Got to get some of those high altitude pies. I hear the pizza place in town is
good stuff.
Very good. Cool. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat today and really share how you've evolved. Really is what it sounds like over the last couple of years. I might have to go back and listen to that episode from May of 2019. But for anyone out there who listened to this one and has also listened to that episode, love to hear your thoughts and share it on social and let us know what you think. Ty, thanks so much for taking the time, and we'll see you up there.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan.
Of course. That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.